The cowboy spat in the dirt at Martha Bennett's feet and called her a fat waste of a train ticket. So she bent down, picked up his own tin cup off the rail, poured the coffee out in the dust and said, "Cold and bitter, same as your manners." 800 miles she had ridden to marry a man who took one look at her and wished she'd never come. They called her the bride nobody wanted. But before this story ends, every hard man on that ranch will pull off his hat for her. If you love watching the overlooked rise, subscribe, follow this story to the very end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far it's traveled. The cowboy who'd spat at her feet went red to the ears. "You dumped my coffee," he said. "I did." Martha Bennett answered, setting his empty cup back on the rail. "You can thank me. It was terrible." The men around the stagecoach laughed, but they laughed at him now, not her, and that turned his face redder still. A lean one near the wheel hat, too big for his head, found his nerve. Boss ordered himself a wife and got himself a cook wagon. The yard broke open with it. 6, 7 of them slapping their thighs. Martha set her travel bag down in the dirt. She did not look at the ground. She turned to the lean one and asked the only question that mattered. "How many men and what time are they hungry?" The laughing caught in their throats like a fishbone. "What'd you say?" "You heard me. How many men eat at this ranch and what time do they want their supper?" Simple question. A body that talks as much as you ought to manage an answer. A man came forward off the porch and stopped. Tall, hard through the shoulders, maybe 35, with a face that hadn't smiled in a long while. He held his hat in his hand. He did not put it on. Wyatt Callahan, the man she'd agreed to marry by letter. He looked her over the way a man looks at a horse come up lame the morning of the race. "You'd be Miss Bennett, Martha Bennett, and you'd be the man who wrote me 3 letters and signed every one of them respectfully. I kept them." Something moved behind his eyes. He hadn't expected that. "Reckon I did," he said. "Reckon you did." She let the quiet sit a moment, the way you let dough rest before you work it. The lean cowboy wasn't done. "Boss, you sure about this? She don't look like she could chase down a calf." "Didn't ask you, Cole." "I'm only saying." "I know what you're saying." Wyatt stepped down into the yard slow and crossed it until he stood in front of her. Up close, he was bigger than he'd seemed, and tireder. The lines around his mouth came from grief, not weather. Martha had buried enough people to know the difference. "Miss Bennett, I'll give it to you straight because I figure you'd rather have it that way." "I would." "You ain't what I pictured." The men went quiet to hear it. Martha didn't blink. "And you ain't what I pictured either, Mr. Callahan." A few of them grinned and ducked their heads. "That's so. What did you picture?" "A man with the decency to send one of these boys to carry a lady's bag. But there it sits in the dirt, and here I stand. So I suppose we both got disappointments to live with." For one long beat, nobody breathed. Then Wyatt bent, picked up the bag himself and held it. He didn't hand it to a hand. He carried it. The men saw. Cole, most of all. "Come up to the house," Wyatt said. "We'll talk." She followed him across the yard. Behind her, an older man muttered, "She's got more sand than the last 3 put together." And another said, "She won't last a week." Martha heard both. She kept them. A woman in her place learned early to keep accounts who said what, who meant it, who'd come around if you gave him reason to. Inside, she ran one finger along the back of a chair and looked at the gray it came away with. She passed a table built to seat a dozen with a single chair pulled out and the rest shoved against the wall. She reached up without being asked and straightened a curtain that had been hanging crooked long enough to forget it had ever hung straight. Wyatt watched her do it. He didn't say anything. "Sit," he said, and set her bag down by the door. "Careful, like it might break." Martha sat. She folded her hands on the dusty table and waited. He didn't sit. He stood by a cold hearth turning his hat round and round by the brim. "I'll lay it out plain. I run cattle. 40 head of men work this outfit through the season. I got no wife and no time to court one, so I wrote an agency and they sent your name. Said you could cook for a crew. They told you true. Did they? His jaw set. Because in 3 days I've got a roundup coming in. The whole outfit rides back hungry as wolves and twice as mean. I need somebody who can feed 20 men and keep 'em fed. I don't need somebody who's gonna faint over a hot stove or cry when a cowhand cusses. Martha tilted her head. You worried I'll faint, Mr. Callahan. I'm worried you don't know what you signed on for. She laughed, not unkind but real, the first true sound she'd made since the coach. Sir, I've cooked for railroad gangs laying track through Kansas in August. Fed mining crews coming up out of the ground so hungry they'd have eaten the table if I let 'em. I stood over a fire in weather that froze the coffee before it hit the cup, and I did it for 200 men at a sitting and never sent one away wanting. So no, I am not going to faint. He stared at her. You fed 200 men. I fed worse than your boys and they thank me for it. My boys won't thank you for nothing, not at first. I don't cook to be thanked, Martha said. I cook because a man can't work on an empty belly, and a hungry man is a mean man, and a mean man gets somebody hurt. That's not kindness, Mr. Callahan. That's arithmetic. Something flickered across his face that might have been respect if he'd let it land. He didn't. He set his hat on the mantel instead. Martha stood and crossed to the kitchen door and looked in. She didn't say a word about what she saw. The rusted stove, the grease gone tacky over everything. A flour sack left open so long the weevils had taken it. She just looked, and the looking told her everything about the last person who'd quit in here. Who cooked before me? She asked. Fella named Pruitt. Drank. Left in the spring. And before him... A pause. A long one. My fiancée. Wyatt's voice dropped low and went careful, like a man stepping around a hole in the floor. Eleanor. She kept this kitchen. She passed. 4 years back. Fever took her in a week. The whole house seemed to hold still. And Martha understood it then, the dust, the one chair, the curtain nobody'd touched. A man doesn't leave a kitchen filthy because he's lazy. He leaves it because cleaning it means admitting the woman who kept it is never walking back through that door. She did not tell him she was sorry. He'd had 4 years of sorry, and it hadn't fixed a thing. Then I'll thank you not to measure my cooking against hers, she said gently. I'd lose. A woman, a man grieves 4 years for must have cooked like the angels. I only cook like somebody who's been hungry and never wants to watch another soul go that way. Wyatt looked at her a long moment. He picked his hat back off the mantel. 3 days. Roundup comes home, you feed 20 men. They say it's fit to eat, you stay. They don't. He set the hat on his head. You go, that's the deal. Martha put out her hand. Not the way a woman offers a hand to be kissed. The way a man offers one to close a bargain. That's the deal I'll take. He looked at the hand. Then he took it. And her grip surprised him strong. Sure, a working hand, not a parlor one. He held on half a second past what he meant to. One more thing, Mr. Callahan. Ma'am. That boy, Cole. What about him? He's going to eat what I cook, same as everybody, and when he does, I'd be obliged if you said nothing to him about it. Let him learn his lesson with his own mouth full. A man hates being told. He don't mind so much finding out. The corner of Wyatt's mouth pulled. He almost smiled. He thought better of it. You're a strange woman, Miss Bennett. Been called worse, she said. Today even. He went back out to his men, and the door hadn't finished swinging before Cole started up again. 200 men, she says. You believe that, boss, 200? Get the horses set for morning. And Cole? Yeah, boss. There's a second trunk on that coach. Carry it in. Mind you don't drop it. Silence. Then sullen. Yes, boss. Out at the coach, Cole hauled the trunk down off the rack and near-dropped it on his own boot. What she got in here rocks. Book sounds like, said the old one beside him. Amos. They called him a trail rider gone gray. More drives behind him than the rest had, years between them. He didn't lift a finger to help. He just watched Cole stagger under the weight. Books, Cole snorted. What's a cook want with books? Recipes, maybe. Accounts. How should I know? Amos struck a match on his thumbnail. You boys are fools, everyone. How's that, old man? You're betting on the shape of her instead of the look in her eye. He drew on the match and shook it out. I seen that look before, on a fella who fed an army and never broke a sweat. Folks rode 40 miles for his cooking, 40 miles hard trail for a plate of beans and a biscuit. And what happened to him? Amos went quiet. He folded the spent match in two. Don't matter, he said. Point is, you don't get a look like that being soft. You get it being tested. He nodded at the house. And that one's been tested plenty, more'n you, boy. Cole heaved the trunk up onto his shoulder, grunting. She's been tested at the supper table, maybe. The old man's eyes went flat and cold. You ever go 3 days on the trail with nothing but creek water and a hard heel of bread? No. Then keep your mouth shut about who's been tested. Cole kept his mouth shut. He carried the trunk in. And he set it down a good sight gentler than he'd picked it up. Martha started before the sun the next morning, and she did not stop. She dragged the rusted grates out and scoured them with sand and ash till they came up dark and clean. She emptied the weevil flour into the hog trough. She took down every jar and tin in that pantry and wrote each one in a small book in a hand neater than most men could manage. She found the leak over the dry goods and climbed up on a chair and stuffed it with rag and tar herself, because asking a man to do it would cost her more than doing it. The hands watched from the corral and laid their bets. She'll work herself to death before the roundup even gets here. Nah, she'll quit. 3 days she's gone. My money's on gone. Mine too. Only Amos didn't bet against her. Inside, Martha heard none of it. She was on her knees working blacking into the cold iron of the stove, and her arms ached and her dress was soaked through, and she scrubbed harder than the iron needed. She'd been the big girl, the plain girl, the one who'd never marry, then the one a man left at 30 after he'd promised and thought better of it. She'd heard every cruel name a body could invent for a woman who didn't look the way folks wanted, and she'd outlived the people who said them. She pressed the rag down till her knuckles went white. Then she let out a breath and her hands went steady again, and she kept on. That was all. She kept on. It was the only thing she'd ever been able to count on about herself. That evening, Wyatt came to the kitchen door. He stood in it a while before she noticed, watching her spoon out a plate of beef and biscuit she'd made from the little she'd saved, just to test her own cleaned stove. She turned and caught him. You hungry, Mr. Callahan? He hesitated. I ate. You ate jerky off the back of a horse, I'd wager. That's not eating, that's surviving. She set the plate on the scrubbed table and pulled out the chair. The single chair. The one that had sat alone since Eleanor died. Sit. He didn't move. It's a chair. It won't bite. And the food's going cold while you stand there being proud. Slow Wyatt came in. He lowered himself into the chair he'd not been able to fill for 4 years. He looked at the plate. Then he looked at her. You did all this in a day. I did what wanted doing. She poured his coffee. Eat, and tell me if my stove runs hot or cold, so I know how to set it for 20. He picked up the fork. He took a bite. He went very still. Martha said nothing. You don't ask a man if it's good. You let his mouth answer for him. Wyatt set the fork down. He didn't look at her. My boys will be home in 2 days, cold, starved, ready to call you everything they called you today and worse. I know it. They won't go easy. Martha sat down across from him in a chair she pulled off the wall and folded her working hands on the clean table. Mr. Callahan, in 3 days those boys are going to come through that door so hungry they can't see straight, and I'm going to feed them better than they've been fed in their whole lives. And every last one of them, Cole loudest of all, is going to forget every word he said to me this morning. Wyatt picked the fork back up. He didn't argue. He ate every bite, and then he ate a second plate, and when he finally pushed back from the table, he looked at the woman across from him a long time like he was seeing something he hadn't counted on and had no word ready for. He stood. He set his hat on. Good night, Miss Bennett. Good night, Mr. Callahan. He stopped at the door, his hand on the frame. It was good. Rough. Like the words cost him something. The supper. It was real good. Then he was gone. Martha cleared the single plate and washed it in water she'd hauled and heated herself. She banked the fire down careful so it'd hold its warmth till morning. She stood a moment in the kitchen she'd brought back to life in a single day, and she pressed her aching hands flat against the warm iron of the stove, and she let herself feel just for that moment how badly she wanted this to be the last place she ever had to prove herself. Then she straightened. She had 2 days, and 20 hungry men riding home. She turned down the lamp and went to bed. Morning came gray and early, and Martha was already at the stove when Wyatt found her, though he'd risen before any man on the place. He stopped in the doorway. He didn't say anything for a moment. The kitchen that had sat dead 4 years was warm, and it smelled of bread, and there was light coming off the scrubbed iron, like the room had remembered it was alive. "You sleep at all?" he asked. "Some." Martha didn't turn from her work. A body learns to do without when the work won't wait. The roundup don't come back 2 days. "And in 2 days, I'll have fed them once and be cooking the second meal," she said. "You don't start a thing the morning it's due, Mr. Callahan. You start it now, so when the morning comes, you've got nothing left to do but the doing." He came in and set his hat on the table and looked at the list she'd left beside it, written in that neat small hand. "This is a lot of provisions. It's 20 men eating like wolves for a week. That's not a lot. That's barely enough." He ran a thumb down the column. "Tate at the Mercantile will charge me double for half of this." Then Tate at the Mercantile has never had to answer to a cook. She wiped her hands on her apron and turned to face him. "Send me with him. I'll do the buying." Wyatt frowned. "You don't know Tate." "I know 100 Tates," Martha said. "Every town's got one. Sells the soft potatoes to the rancher and saves the good ones for the banker's wife. I'll go." "It's a 2-hour drive." "Then we'd best leave now." He looked at her a long moment, and something in his face gave way that hadn't given way before. "Cole'll drive you." Martha smiled just a little. "Will he now?" "He'll drive you," Wyatt said again. "And he'll behave, or he'll answer to me." Cole did not want to drive her. He made that plain by saying nothing at all, sitting up on the bench with his hat pulled low while Martha climbed up beside him without help, and snapping the reins harder than the team deserved. They went a mile before she spoke. "You can hate me quiet," she said, "or you can hate me out loud. Out loud's friendlier. At least then I know where I stand." Cole's jaw worked. "I don't hate you, ma'am. No, I just don't see why he sent off for some woman in the mail like she was a sack of seed." "And got one he didn't want," Martha finished for him. "You can say it. I heard worse before breakfast." That shut him up another mile. "He didn't have to do this," Cole said finally, and there was something underneath the words that wasn't anger. He was doing fine, was he? Martha kept her eyes on the road. A man eating jerky off the back of a horse in a house with the curtains hung crooked 4 years running. That your idea of fine? Cole's hands tightened on the reins. He didn't answer that one at all. Tate's Mercantile was the kind of place where a man kept 2 sets of prices and a smile for whichever one he meant to use. "Callahan's outfit," he said, looking past Martha to Cole as though she weren't standing there. "Heard the boss took a wife. This her?" "This is Miss Bennett," Cole said, and Martha noted he said it plain without the sneer he'd have used yesterday. "She's doing the buying." Tate's smile thinned. "The buying. That's right." Martha laid her list on the counter. "Flour, the good white, not the stuff you've got going gray in the back. Coffee beans, salt pork, dried apples, molasses, lard. And beef, if you've got it hung proper, though. I expect to inspect it before I pay a cent." Tate chuckled. "Ma'am, I've been selling to ranches 20 years. "Then you've been selling soft goods to busy men 20 years, Martha said, "because a busy man doesn't have time to argue, and you know it. I have time. I've got nothing but time and a list. So let's start with the flour, and let's start with the good barrel, not the one you're about to point me at." The store went quiet. Cole looked at the floor to keep from grinning. Tate brought out a sack of flour. Martha opened it. took a pinch, rolled it between her fingers, and let it fall. "That's been damp," she said. "It'll bake heavy and sour. The good barrel, Mr. Tate. There's no other—" "There's a barrel behind that curtain you keep for the people you respect." Martha didn't raise her voice. "I'll be one of those people today, or I'll take Mr. Callahan's account to the town with the railroad spur, and you can explain to him why his cook came home empty. Your choice." Tate looked at her. Then he went behind the curtain. He came back with the good flour. By the time they loaded the wagon, Martha had cut a quarter off the bill. Tate, first quoted, sent back a side of beef that had gone tacky at the bone, and walked out with a sack of dried apples he'd thrown in free, rather than have her keep going down his shelves item by item in front of a full store. Cole drove the first mile home in silence. Then low like it pained him. "Where'd you learn to do that? Feed 200 men on a railroad budget for 3 years, Martha said, and you learn the price of everything in the world and the worth of it too. They're not the same number, Cole. That's the whole trick. A man like Tate's counting on you not knowing the difference." Cole was quiet a while. "You really feed 200 men?" "I really did." "Boss don't believe it." "Boss doesn't have to believe it," Martha said. "He'll see it Thursday." When they got back, the hands drifted over to watch the wagon unload, expecting to find her shorted and shamed. Instead, they found good flour sound beef coffee enough for a month. The mutterings changed shape. They didn't stop. But they changed. "She skinned old Tate." "Nobody skins Tate." "She did." "Cole, did she skin Tate?" Cole hauled a sack down off the wagon and onto his shoulder. "She skinned him clean," he said, and carried it inside. Martha cooked through the day and into the night, getting ahead of the roundup, putting up what would keep. And the kitchen drew the hands the way warmth always draws cold men, one at a time, finding reasons to pass by the open door. She fed them scraps and ends she'd have thrown out anyway. A heel of fresh bread to the boy who looked youngest. A cup of real coffee to the old hand whose hands shook. She didn't make a thing of it. She just put it in front of them and went back to her work, and a man can't keep on hating someone who keeps feeding him without asking anything for it. Wyatt watched it happen from the yard, and he didn't understand all of what he was watching, only that the place felt different than it had in years, and that the difference walked on 2 feet and answered to Martha Bennett. It was past midnight when she heard the kitchen door ease open. She'd gone to her room, but not to sleep, and the floorboard she'd already marked as loose gave the intruder away. She came back down quiet in her stocking feet and stood in the dark of the hall. It was Cole. He had the bucket of starter coals she kept banked for morning, and he was carrying it to the back door to dump it cold. Beside him on the table sat the salt cellar, the big one tipped toward the open flour barrel. He meant to kill her fire and ruin her flour. He meant her to wake to a dead stove and spoiled stores with 20 men due and no time to fix it. Martha lit the lamp. Cole froze with the bucket in his hands. For a moment, neither of them said a word. "Set it down," Martha said. He didn't. His hands shook around the handle. "You gonna tell him?" "Set the coals down, Cole, before you drop them and burn us both up." He set the bucket down. His breath came hard, and his eyes were too bright, and she saw then it wasn't a hard man caught at a hard thing. It was a boy, a scared one. "Why?" Martha said, not angry, just asking. "You came around today. I felt it, so why this tonight?" "Because it ain't yours," Cole said, and his voice cracked clean down the middle. "This kitchen, it ain't yours." "I know whose it was." "You don't know nothin'." He was shaking now all over. "She found me half-starved behind the church in Amarillo. I was 9. Wasn't nobody else'd take a thing on but she did. Brought me here, set me at that table." He pointed at the single chair, the one Martha had pulled out for Wyatt. "Right there. Fed me every night for 2 years, and never once made me feel like I owed her for it. And then the fever came and took her in a week, and the boss shut that kitchen up, and I was glad. I was glad. Because long as it stayed shut, nobody else got to stand where she stood." The lamp hissed between them. Martha set it down on the table slow. "And then I come along," she said quietly, and lit her stove and started feeding her boys her bread in her kitchen, like I had a right to. Cole couldn't answer. He scrubbed at his eyes with the heel of his hand, furious at himself. "I'm sorry." He got out. "I'll tell the boss. I'll pack my kit tonight. You don't have to." "You'll do no such thing," Martha said. He stared at her. "Sit down, Cole." "Ma'am, sit down." She pulled out the chair. His chair, it turned out. The one Eleanor had sat him in when he was 9 and starving, and certain nobody in the world wanted him. Cole sat. Martha cut a slice of the fresh bread still soft from the evening's bake, and she spread it with butter and set it in front of him on the table, where Eleanor had set 100 plates before her. "I never met your Eleanor," she said. "But I know her kind. I've been her kind. The woman who feeds the ones nobody else'll feed." She sat down across from him. "I'm not here to stand where she stood. There's no standing where the dead stood. I'm just here to keep the stove lit so it don't go cold on the next 9-year-old that wanders in off the road behind a church." Cole looked at the bread. He didn't touch it. His shoulders started to shake. "You should hate me," he said. "I've got no time to hate a boy who loved a good woman so hard he tried to wreck a flour barrel over her," Martha said. "Eat your bread." He ate it. He cried while he ate it the way grown men cry, ashamed and silent and unstoppable. And Martha let him. And she did not say one more word about it, then or ever. When he was done, he wiped his face and stood and carried the bucket of coals back to the stove and banked it careful the way she'd shown nobody, but the way he'd plainly watched her do it. "I'll be up before light," he said. "Haul your water. Carry whatever needs carrying." "I'd be obliged." He stopped at the door, the way Wyatt had stopped at it the night before, hand on the frame. "You won't tell him." "There's nothing to tell," Martha said. "A man banked my fire and went to bed. Good night, Cole." He left, and Martha sat alone in Eleanor's kitchen a long while, and she thought about all the ways a person could be hungry, and how few of them had anything to do with food. True to his word, Cole was up before the light, and so were Martha's stores, and the second day went faster, with a pair of hands that had stopped fighting her. The other men noticed Cole hauling her water without being asked, and they noticed he'd stopped his mouth, and a couple of them started carrying things too, the way men will follow one of their own across a line they'd never cross alone. By the afternoon of the second day, Martha had bread enough, beef butchered, and ready beans, soaking apples, stewing coffee ground. Everything that could be done ahead was done. All that was left was the round up the 20 men and the proving. She let herself believe she was ready. That was when the rider came. He came hard off the north range, lathering his horse, and he was hollering before he hit the yard. Wyatt was out of the barn at a run, and the hands dropped what they held, and Martha came to the kitchen door, wiping her hands. "Boss," the rider shouted. "Storm's comin' down off the Llano, big one black as the inside of a hat. The herd's spooked. They're scattered halfway to the river. We ain't got 2 days. We got the boys riding in tonight. All of 'em froze through and beat to nothing." Wyatt's head turned. He looked straight across the yard at Martha. And Martha looked at the sky going green-black behind the rider, and she felt the first cold gust come down hard enough to lift her apron. And she heard far off, and getting closer, the first low roll of thunder break across the plains. She wasn't ready. Nobody was ever ready. But the men were coming frozen and starving and beaten, and they were coming tonight. She turned back to her stove, and she got to work. She got to work, and she worked like the storm was a man she meant to beat. Cole was at her side before she asked, "What do you need?" "Fire built high and held there. Water on to boil all of it. And you tell those boys to drag every table we've got into one long line, because 20 froze men don't wait their turn polite." "Yes, ma'am." And Cole. She caught his sleeve. "When they come in mean, and they will come in mean, you don't answer back for me. You hear not a word. Let me handle them my own way." He didn't like it. She saw he didn't. But he nodded and went. For 3 hours the storm threw itself against the house, and Martha threw herself against the stove, and the two of them came near to even. She had stew going in the big kettle beef she'd butchered the day before, falling apart soft and dark in its own gravy. She had biscuits going in batches she could keep coming all night. She had the dried apples she'd skinned out of Tate stewing down into cobbler with the last of the molasses. She had coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and enough of it to drown a town. Wyatt came in once, soaked through having ridden out to meet the herd, and turned back when he couldn't see his own hand in front of his face. "They're coming," he said. "Slow. The storm's got 'em scattered. They'll be froze to the saddle by the time they hit the yard." He looked at the kettle, the trays, the rows of biscuit. His voice went rough. "Miss Bennett, this is more than I've seen come out of a kitchen in—" "Then don't stand there watching it," Martha said. "Go put dry blankets where men can reach them. They'll need warming from the outside, same as the inn." He went. The first horse hit the yard near midnight. Then another and another, until the dark out front was full of the sound of beaten animals and beaten men, and the door banged open, and the cold came in ahead of them, and they came stumbling through it, one and two at a time, white-lipped and shaking, and so far past hungry, they'd gone quiet with it. They expected nothing. Martha could see it on every face. They expected cold biscuit and colder coffee, and a long crawl to a cold bunk. They came in with their heads down, already grieving the supper they were sure they'd missed. Then the smell hit them. A young rider stopped dead 3 steps inside the door, swaying. "Lord above," he whispered, "am I dreamin' it?" "You ain't dreamin'," said Cole, taking the boy's coat off his shaking shoulders. "Sit down before you fall down." They came in, and they stopped everyone, and they stared at the long line of tables, groaning under hot food steam rising off it into the cold air, and not a man among them could make sense of what he was seeing. All but one. He came in last, the biggest of them, a slab of a man with a frozen mustache and a temper the cold had done nothing to improve. Boone the others called him the meanest mouth in the outfit, and he hadn't been at the ranch the day the stagecoach came, and so he hadn't learned a thing. He took one look at Martha standing by her stove, and his lip curled. "This her?" he said to the room. "This the mail-order heifer the boss sent off for—" The room went still. Cole came halfway up out of his crouch, and Martha caught his eye across the room and held it, and he sat back down. Not a word. She'd told him. Not a word. "That's me," Martha said evenly, ladle in her hand. "And you'd be the one who rode in last and loudest. Sit down, mister. Your supper's getting cold while you work your mouth." A couple of the men laughed despite themselves. Boone didn't. "I'll eat when I see it's fit," he said. "I've had camp cooking made me sick a week. I ain't trustin' my belly to some—" "Then don't trust it to me," Martha said. She filled a bowl, walked it across the room, and set it down hard in front of the chair he hadn't yet taken. Stew thick with beef steam pouring off it. "Trust it to that. Sit down, and if it's not the best things crossed your lips in a year, you can stand right back up and say so in front of God and everybody. Go on. I'll wait." The whole room was watching now. Boone looked at the bowl. He looked at her. He sat down slow, daring her with his eyes the whole way. He picked up the spoon. He took a mouthful, jaw set ready to spit it out, and shame her in front of every man he rode with. He stopped chewing. His eyes changed. Something behind them came undone. He swallowed, and he sat very still, and the hand that had reached to shove the bowl away came back and picked up the spoon again instead. He took a second bite, a third. He didn't look up. He couldn't. "Well," Martha said. Boone didn't answer. Boone couldn't answer. Boone was eating like a man who'd forgotten what it was to be fed head down over the bowl, and when he scraped the bottom of it, he pushed it toward her without lifting his eyes and said one word, hoarse. "More." The room let out its breath all at once, and then they fell on it. Martha served every plate herself. She wouldn't let Cole do it, wouldn't let any of them. She walked the line of tables with the kettle and the trays, and she put hot food in front of every frozen man on that ranch with her own 2 hands, and they ate like she'd brought them back from the dead, because near enough she had. The young rider who'd thought he was dreaming ate 3 biscuits before he came up for air, then looked at her with his eyes shining and said, "Ma'am, I'd marry you myself if the boss hadn't called it first." And the table roared, and even Boone cracked something that on a kinder face would have been a smile. They asked for seconds. They asked for thirds. Hard men who hadn't praised a thing since the war went quiet and reverent over bowls of stew and the cobbler. When it came near, caused a riot, and through all of it, Martha kept moving, kept filling, kept that food coming hot off the stove, like the storm outside had no claim on the warmth she was making in here. Wyatt stood against the far wall with his arms crossed and watched his whole outfit fall in love with the woman he'd been ashamed to claim 3 days before, and he didn't say a word because he didn't trust his voice. It was Amos who stood up. The old trail rider rose slow from the end of the long table, and there was something in the way he did it that pulled every eye in the room. He set down his cup. He looked at Martha a long, long moment like a man checking a thing he'd been turning over in his mind all night and couldn't quite let himself believe. "Boys," Amos said, "I told you a story. Back in the yard 2 days gone. Some of you heard it." Cole went still. "I told you about a camp cook fed an army out on the Kansas line. Folks rode 40 miles for a plate of it. I told you that story, and I let you think it was some old boy with a beard." He shook his head slow. "It weren't. I let you think that, 'cause I wasn't sure, and a man my age don't like to be wrong out loud." He turned and faced Martha full on. "But I'm sure now. I have been sure since the first bite." His voice cracked. "I ate at that camp once, winter of '79. I come in off a bad drive, half-dead fingers, Black hadn't kept food down in 3 days. Everybody else give me up. The cook didn't." He had to stop. His old hand came up and wiped his eyes, and didn't hide it. "The cook sat with me half the night, fed me a spoonful at a time, till I could hold it, and wouldn't take a dime, and wouldn't take thanks neither." I never forgot that face, not in 7 years. The room had gone silent as a church. Amos pointed across it straight at her. "That cook," he said, "was her." Nobody moved. Martha stood by her stove with the ladle in her hand, and for the first time in 3 days, in 7 years, in longer than that, her own composure left her. Her chin trembled. She gripped the ladle to keep her hand steady, and she did not quite manage it. "I wondered if it was you," she said quietly. "You've gone gray, Amos, but I never forget a man I've fed back from the edge." The old man crossed the room. He didn't say anything else. He just took her free hand in both of his old shaking ones and bent his head over it and held it there. And a sound went through the room, chairs scraping back one after another, the whole outfit getting to its feet. And then, one by one, every man in that room reached up and took off his hat. Boone was the last. Boone, who'd come in loud and cruel an hour before, stood there big and beaten and humbled, and he pulled the hat off his head and held it against his chest and looked at the floor like a boy in church. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm sorry for what I said. I didn't know who I was talking to." "You didn't know who you were talking to before you knew my name either," Martha said, and her voice was gentle now, all the iron gone out of it. "That's the part you ought to be sorry for. Not the cooking, the judging. You'd have wronged me just the same if I'd been nobody at all." Boone turned that over. Then he nodded slow. "Yes, ma'am, I reckon I would have." He looked up at her. "Don't make it less true that you ain't nobody." It was the kindest thing the man had likely said in years, and Martha let it stand. Across the room, Wyatt still hadn't moved from the wall. But his arms had come uncrossed somewhere in the last few minutes, and his hat was in his hands, turning round and round by the brim, and he was looking at Martha Bennett like a man who'd ordered a thing out of a catalog and been handed something he had no price for and no way to deserve. The men ate themselves stuffed and grateful, and they thanked her on their way out into the bunkhouse, every one of them by name, and Cole stayed back to help her stack the empty kettles, and when the last of them had gone, Amos lingered at the door. "I owe you my life, Martha Bennett," the old man said. 7 years I carried that, and didn't know your name to thank it. You don't owe me a thing. I'd have done it for anybody. That's the whole point of it. I know. Amos settled his hat back on. "That's exactly why I owe you." He looked at her, and then he looked at Wyatt across the room, and something shrewd and kind moved in his old eyes. "Some folks feed you so you'll be in their debt, and some feed you 'cause they can't stand to watch you go without. Took me to 70-some years to learn to tell the two apart." He touched his hat brim. "Good night, ma'am." "Good night, boss." Then he was gone, and the storm had quieted to a steady rain, and the kitchen was warm and full of the smell of everything she'd made, and Martha stood in the middle of it with her hands aching, and her hair come loose, and her plain brown dress soaked through with the work of it. Wyatt crossed the room at last. He stopped in front of her clothes the way he had in the yard 3 days ago, except nothing about him was the same as it had been in the yard 3 days ago. "Miss Bennet," he said, and stopped. He tried again. "Martha." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it cost him something, and they both heard it cost him. "I owe you an apology bigger than any one man's got the words for. I looked at you and I know what you saw. I was wrong. I know that too." She set the ladle down. She was too tired to make him work for it. "You're not the first man to be wrong about me, Mr. Callahan. You won't be the last. The only thing that's ever mattered to me is what a man does after he finds out." Wyatt looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached up and he took off his hat. Slow, the last man in that house to do it, and the only one who's doing it, made her heart go strange and quick in her chest, and he held it against him, and he bowed his head to the woman he'd been ashamed to call his 3 days before. "Then I aim to spend a good while showing you," he said, "what I do after." And Martha Bennet, who had been laughed off a stagecoach, who had been called a cook wagon and a heifer and a waste of a train ticket, who had fed 200 men and saved a stranger's life and asked nothing back from any of it, stood in a dead woman's kitchen. She had brought roaring back to life and found she could not say a single word. She found her words by morning, but by then the whole ranch had changed around her, and there was no calling it back. The men who'd come in, frozen and humbled the night before, woke up different. It started small. Boone was at the woodpile before sunup splitting and stacking a week's worth of stove wood without a soul telling him to, and when Martha came out to thank him, he ducked his head and said only, "A cook can't cook on a cold stove, ma'am," and went on splitting. The young rider Pete, his name turned out to be, took to hauling her water 2 buckets at a time, and would not be talked out of it. "My back's young, and yours has done enough," he said, and that was the end of the argument. They brought her things, fresh game off their hunts, the best cuts dressed clean, a jar of wild honey one of them had been hoarding for himself. Pete brought her a bunch of late prairie flowers wrapped in a bandana, then went red as a brand and bolted before she could say a word over them. And when she spoke now, they listened. Not the polite, half-listening men give a woman their humoring, the real kind. She'd say the beef was turning, and they'd move it. She'd say a man looked peaked, and they'd make him sit. The kitchen had become the place a man came when something was wrong, and Martha had become the one they came to, and not a one of them could have told you when it happened. It just had. Cole said it plainest a few mornings on, leaning in the doorway watching her work. "You know what's strange, ma'am? I've been on this outfit 4 years. I never once seen these boys agree on nothing. Not the weather, not the whiskey, not the Lord above." He shook his head. "And now they all agree on you." "They agree on the cooking," Martha said. "No." Cole was quiet a beat. "They agreed on the cooking the first night. This is something else." He pushed off the frame. "Anyhow, wood's stacked. Water's hauled. You holler if you need a thing." Wyatt watched all of it and said little, but Martha had learned to read the man's silences the way she read his appetite, and she knew the difference between a man holding back because he had nothing to say and a man holding back because he had too much. Wyatt was the second kind now. He took his meals at the long table with the men instead of alone, and he started lingering after, and one evening he carried the empty plates to her himself, and when their hands met on the same stack of dishes, neither of them pulled away as fast as they might have. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know it." He set the plates by the basin. "Eleanor used to say a man who won't carry his own plates got no business being fed." A pause. He looked at her sideways. "First time I've said her name out loud without it hurting clear through. Thought you ought to know that. Reckon it's got something to do with you." Martha kept her hands in the wash water so he wouldn't see them go still. "That's a fine thing to say to a woman, Mr. Callahan. I'm out of practice." The corner of his mouth pulled. "Used to be smoother," so Eleanor claimed. I'd have liked her, I think. You'd have run her ragged, Wyatt said, and it was the first time she'd heard him laugh. Really laugh, and the sound of it filled up the kitchen better than the fire did. It might have gone on like that, slow and warm, and finding its own way, if Silas Harlan hadn't ridden through the gate. He came on a horse worth more than the bunkhouse, with 2 riders flanking him, and a coat too fine for the trail, and he came smiling. Martha was on the porch, shelling peas when he reined up, and she knew the type, before he opened his mouth, the kind of man whose smile cost him nothing, because somebody else always paid for it. Well, Harlan said, looking her over the way Tate had, the way the men had, the way Wyatt himself had 3 weeks ago. So this is the famous cook. Word travels, ma'am. I've got hands riding 12 miles out of their way for a meal at Callahan's now, costing me good men your cooking. Then your men ought to eat before they ride, Martha said. Whom do I have the pleasure of not knowing? The smile flickered. He hadn't expected the tongue. Silas Harlan. I run the Bar H. 40,000 acres north and west of here. He let the number sit. 3 times what Callahan's got and growing. That's a great deal of land for one man to need. A man needs what he can take and hold, ma'am. He swung down off the horse easy, like he owned the porch she stood on. And right now, what I want is you. In my kitchen. I'll pay you double what Callahan pays. Triple. Name it. Wyatt was crossing the yard now fast, with Cole and Boone falling in behind him, but Harlan didn't so much as glance their way. He kept his eyes on Martha, and his voice carried deliberate, so every man in the yard would hear the offer and hear her answer. Double, he said again. A house of your own. Help under you so you're giving the orders instead of taking them. You'd never haul another bucket of water as long as you lived. He spread his hands. I'm a generous man, Miss Bennett. I reward worth when I find it. Callahan here got you for a song, and didn't even want you way I heard it. I'm offering you what you're actually worth. The yard had gone dead quiet. Every man on the place was watching her. Pete looked sick. Cole's jaw was set hard. Boone had his hand near his belt. And Wyatt stood 3 feet off with his face shut like a door, saying nothing because he was too proud to ask her to stay, and too honest to pretend the money didn't dwarf anything he could match. Martha set down her bowl of peas. Mr. Harlan, she said, that's a handsome offer. I won't pretend it isn't. I've cooked for wages my whole life, and I know to the penny what double would mean to a woman in my place. Harlan smiled wider. He thought he had her. But I'm going to say no. The smile stopped. You'll forgive me, Harlan said, but no woman in her right mind. A woman in her right mind is exactly who's saying it. Martha stepped to the edge of the porch. I've worked railroad camps and mining camps and every kind of outfit there is, and I've been paid well and paid poorly, and run off and lured away, and I learned a thing somewhere in the middle of all of it. Wages buy your hands, Mr. Harlan. They don't buy the rest of you. She looked out over the yard, over the men who'd carried her water, and brought her flowers and taken off their hats. I spent 28 years being told I wasn't worth keeping. Then I came here, and these men decided I was. Not for my looks, not for my money, for the work. You can't pay me to leave the first place on God's earth that ever wanted me for the right reason. She met his eyes. I finally found a place worth building. You don't have enough acres to buy me off of it. Pete let out a whoop before he could stop himself. Cole was grinning. Boone spat in the dirt like a man sealing a deal. But Harlan didn't get angry. That was the thing that turned Martha cold. He didn't redden, didn't argue, didn't ride off. He just nodded slow, and that easy smile came back, and somehow the smile was worse than fury would have been. Worth building, he repeated. That's fine. That's real fine. He pulled his gloves back on finger by finger. I do admire loyalty, Miss Bennett. I just hope you've picked a thing that'll still be standing to be loyal to. He turned to Wyatt at last, and his voice dropped just enough that only the front of the yard caught it. You tell her Callahan about the note, about where this ranch is gonna be come the first of the year. He let that hang. No, I can see you didn't. Wyatt's face had gone white under the weather brown. Harlan swung back up on his fine horse. Offer stays open 30 days, ma'am. After that, he gathered his reins well. After that, I expect the question answers itself." He touched his hat brim, mocking. "Pleasure not knowing you." He rode out, and his two riders behind him, and the yard stayed dead silent until the dust settled. Martha turned to Wyatt. "What note?" she said. Wyatt wouldn't look at her. "It's ranch business." "What note, Wyatt?" The men were drifting back, giving them room, but Cole stayed, and Martha was glad of it. Wyatt took off his hat and dragged a hand through his hair. 2 years back, I took a loan against the place. Bad winter lost near half the herd, needed cash to restock or go under. Borrowed from the bank in Amarillo. His jaw worked. This spring, Harlan bought the note off the bank. Bought my debt. So now I don't owe a bank that wants its money back slow and steady. I owe a man who'd just as soon I couldn't pay, so the land falls to him. He finally looked at her, and there was shame in it. The same shame she'd seen the first day, except this time it wasn't aimed at her. "Balloon payment comes due first of the year. Near twice what I've got. He's not buying you to feed his men, Martha. He's buying you to gut this place before he takes it. Take the heart out of it, the men'll scatter, and there won't be a thing left worth fighting for when he calls the note. How much do you owe?" "More than I can pay." "That's not a number," Martha said. "How much?" He told her. Martha stood very still. Then she did a thing none of them expected. She didn't cry, and she didn't fret, and she didn't tell him it would all work out. She turned to Cole. "That trunk of mine, the heavy one you near broke your foot on. I want it in the kitchen by supper." Cole blinked. "The one full of books." "They're not all books." Martha was already untying her apron, then thinking better of it and tying it back. "Some of them are ledgers. 12 years of them. Every camp I ever cooked, every outfit I ever fed. I kept the accounts when the foreman couldn't be bothered or couldn't read, and I kept them clean, and I kept them mine." She looked at Wyatt. "You let a banker and then a cattle baron handle the figures on this place, didn't you? Because you're a cattleman, not a clerk, and figures give you a headache." Wyatt stared at her. "How'd you—" "Because every good man I've ever known would rather break a wild horse than balance a column," Martha said. "It's how men like Harlan eat men like you alive, not with guns, with arithmetic." She held out her hand, palm up. "Show me the note, the original, and every paper you've got from that cattle sale you made to cover the interest last fall. All of it." "Martha, show me Wyatt. You said you'd spend a good while showing me what you do after a thing. Well, I'm asking you to do a thing now. Let me see the books." He looked at her hand a long moment. Then he went into the house and came back with a strongbox, and he set it in her hands, and Cole hauled her trunk up onto the long table, and Martha Bennett, who had been laughed off a stagecoach as a fat mail-order bride who couldn't possibly be good for anything but a cook wagon, sat down with a lamp and a sharpened pencil, and 12 years of her own clean ledgers, and she began to read another man's figures, the way she'd read Tate's Flower, by feel, line by line. She read past supper. She read past the men turning in. She read with Cole half asleep in the corner, refusing to leave her and Wyatt across the table, unable to leave either watching her work with an expression he couldn't have named. It was near midnight when her pencil stopped. She went back 3 lines. She checked a figure against the cattle bill of sale, then against the note, then against the bill of sale again. She did the sum a second time, a third. Her hand had gone very still. "Wyatt?" Her voice was odd, careful. "This cattle sale last fall. 300 head you sold through Harlan's company to pay your interest. He brokered it for you. Took his commission paid, the bank gave you the difference." "That's right. He did me a favor, I figured. Took the herd off my hands quick when I was pressed." "How many head did you sell him?" 300. Martha turned the bill of sale around and laid it next to the tally book in her trunk, the one where she'd taught herself years ago to count cattle the way a buyer counts them by the weight and the season and the going rate to the dollar. "You sold him 300 head, she said quietly. "And he paid you for 240. And then he wrote 300 on the paper he filed and pocketed the price of 60 head of your cattle and used your own beef to fatten the very debt he's about to take your ranch over." She looked up, and her eyes had gone hard as the iron of her stove. He didn't cheat you a little, Wyatt. He's been cheating you the whole time. It's right here. It's been sitting in your strongbox for 8 months in his own hand. The lamp hissed. Cole had come fully awake. Wyatt was on his feet without knowing he'd stood. You're certain? I've kept books for 12 years and never been a dollar off, Martha said. I am certain. He forged the count. I can prove it. She set down the pencil. The question isn't whether he robbed you, Wyatt. The question is what we're going to do about the most powerful man in this county now that I can show the whole world he's a thief. Wyatt's first answer was the one she'd expected and the one she wouldn't allow. I'll ride over there and put my hands around his neck, and he'll shoot you off your horse and call it trespass, and the law in this county eats out of his hand, and I'll be burying you by Sunday. Martha said, not looking up from the papers. No. We don't beat a man like Harlan with a fist. We beat him with the one thing he's too proud to think a cook would have. She tapped the ledger. His own paper. But this alone won't do it. You said you could prove it. I can prove what you got paid. I can't yet prove what he got paid. He'll stand up in front of any judge and say the difference is broker's lost spoilage, drover's wages 100 lies, a busy court'll swallow, because he's Silas Harlan, and I'm the woman who shells his neighbor's peas. She set the pencil down. We need the other end of it, whoever Harlan sold those 300 head to. Get me a paper from that buyer showing he paid Harlan for 300, and Harlan only passed you the price of 240, and there's no lie left for him to tell. The gap's the theft in 2 men's handwriting, neither of them yours. It was Amos who answered from the corner, fully awake now, and on his feet. He'd have moved that herd through Dodge, the old man said. Ain't but one outfit buys that size lot up there worth a damn. Dunmore Company. I drove for 'em 20 years. The yard boss, Sam Dunmore, he's honest as Sunday, and he keeps a receipt for every hoof crosses his scale. Amos was already reaching for his hat. I can be there in 5 days hard, 5 back. They'll talk to me. The note comes due in 11, Wyatt said. Then I'd best not stop to sleep. He rode at first light, and the waiting near killed them all. The men knew something was wrong without being told the whole of it. A cook learns a ranch's moods, and a ranch learns its cooks, and Martha's had gone tight and quiet. Cole pried it out of her by the 3rd day, standing in the kitchen with his hat in his hands. You tell me what's eatin' you, he said, or I'll worry myself useless guessin'. So she told him, and Cole's young face went through anger, and then through something harder and older. He stole 60 head of the boss's cattle, Cole said slowly. And now he's going to use the money to take the whole place, while the boss thanked him for the favor. That's the size of it. Cole was quiet a long moment. Eleanor used to feed Harlan's drovers when they come through. Did you know that never turned a hungry man off, didn't matter whose brand he rode for? His jaw tightened. And that's the man means to salt the ground she's buried in. He put his hat on. Whatever you need, ma'am. Whatever it takes. The boys'll stand. All of them, even Boone, especially Boone. On the 9th day, Harlan came early. He hadn't waited for the 1st of the year. He'd ridden in with the county sheriff at his side and a folded paper in his glove, and he sat his fine horse in the yard and smiled down at Wyatt like a man come to collect a debt of honor. Callahan, Sheriff Doyle here's got the foreclosure filed proper. Notes called. You can't pay, and we both know you can't pay, so I'm giving you till sundown to clear your people off my land. He let it land. I'd have given you to January, but I heard the strangest thing. Heard your cook's been sitting up nights with my ledgers. The smile didn't move. Nosy habit that. Figured I'd save us both the suspense. So somebody had talked, or Harlan had simply guessed the shape of a clever woman. Either way, Martha understood in one cold rush he'd moved the date to beat Amos home. He knew exactly what she was after, and he meant to take the ranch before the proof could ride through the gate. Wyatt's hand drifted toward his hip. Boone and Cole stepped up on either side of him and 4 more behind, and for one breath the yard balanced on the edge of blood. Don't, Martha said. She came down off the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, calm as a Sunday. Sheriff Doyle? She looked up at the lawman, who at least had the grace not to meet her eye. You're here to enforce a lawful debt. That's your job, and I won't fault you for it. But I'd ask you one thing before you put 20 men out in the cold." She turned to Harlan. "I'd ask you to read aloud in front of the sheriff the count of cattle on the bill of sale you filed for the herd you brokered off this ranch last fall." Harlan's smile thinned. "I'll do no such—" 300 head, Martha said for him. "That's what your filed paper says. I've seen it. The sheriff can see it. It's a public record down at the county office." She turned back to Doyle. "Now ask Mr. Callahan how many heads worth of money he was paid for that same herd." 240, Wyatt said, his voice carrying flat and hard across the yard. A murmur went through the men. Doyle's head came around slow. "That's a 60-head gap, Sheriff," Martha said, "between what this man filed and what he paid. 60 head of beef at last fall's price. And I'd surely like to know where it went." "Broker's costs," Harlan said smoothly. "Drover's spoilage the railroads cut. Any man in the trade'll tell you a herd loses on the trail." "This woman doesn't know cattle from chickens, Sheriff. She cooks." "I do cook." Martha didn't flinch. "I've also kept the books for every outfit that ever fed off my stove 12 years, never a dollar wrong, and I know to the penny what a drive loses and what it don't. 60 head don't vanish to spoilage, Mr. Harlan. 60 head vanish to a man's pocket." She looked at Doyle. "But you don't have to take a cook's word for it. There's a man who weighed those cattle on his own scale and paid Mr. Harlan with his own money, and he keeps a receipt for every hoof. All we'd have to do is ask him." "And he's 100 miles north and unavailable," Harlan said, and for the first time his voice had an edge under the silk. "Sundown Callahan. Sheriff, do your—" "He's at the gate." It was Pete who set it up on the corral rail where he'd climbed to watch the north road, and his voice cracked with it. "Riders coming in hard. It's Amos, and another fella coming on at a gallop." Amos came through that gate, lathered and gray with dust, and near falling out of the saddle, and the man beside him was broad and plain and badged with nothing but the dirt of a long ride, and Amos hauled up in the middle of the yard and got the words out before his horse had stopped. "Sam Dunmore," he gasped, "of the Dunmore Cattle Company, Dodge City. Rode down himself. Wouldn't trust it to paper alone." Dunmore swung down stiff and sore and looked around the yard till he found Harlan, and his honest face went flat and cold. Silas. Just the name, like a thing he'd scraped off his boot. He pulled a folded receipt from his coat and held it up so the sheriff could see the company seal. "Sheriff, I bought a herd off this man last October. 300 head weighed on my own scale, paid in full my mark, and his on the bill." He held it out to Doyle. 300. I paid him for 300. So if the man he bought him from only saw the price of 240, his jaw worked. Then I know exactly what kind of trade Silas Harlan's been running, because I've heard it whispered up and down this trail for 3 years and never had the paper to pin it. Now somebody's done the figuring. He looked at Martha and he took his hat clean off. "Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but you've caught a thief 100 honest men couldn't." The yard erupted. Doyle took the receipt. He laid it beside Wyatt's payment record. He did the sum himself. Lips moving, and when he came to the end of it, his face changed, and he folded both papers together careful and looked up at Silas Harlan with the slow disgust of a man who's been made to carry water for a snake. 60 head, Doyle said, forged on a filed document. That's not broker's loss, Silas. That's fraud, and it's forgery, and it's a county matter and a territorial one both. He reached up and took the foreclosure paper out of Harlan's glove. "This note's bought with stolen money, and I won't enforce a dollar of it till a judge sorts the whole rotten business. You're done calling on this ranch." "Doyle, you work for me." "I work for the county," Doyle said, "and you just made me look a fool in front of it. Get down off that horse." Harlan looked around the yard at the sheriff at Dunmore, at 20 hard men who'd have been glad of an excuse, at the plain heavy woman in the apron who'd unmade him with a pencil, and whatever he saw in it took the smile off his face for good. "This isn't finished," he said. "It surely is," Martha answered. "You just heard it finish. It went to the circuit judge, Tom Avery, 3 weeks later, and it didn't take him an afternoon. Dunmore's receipt and Martha's ledgers laid the whole scheme bare. And once one small rancher had the nerve to stand up, two more came forward with their own short-paid herds, and the legend of the Bar H folded like wet paper. The judge voided the note as fraud in its making, ordered Harlan to make good every stolen head with penalty, and bound him over for the territorial court besides. Wyatt walked out of that courtroom, not owing 1 red cent, and with 60 head of restitution coming that wiped the last of his old debt clean. He didn't say much on the ride home. He waited till the gate, till the men had ridden ahead whooping, and Martha sat the wagon beside him with the ledgers in her lap before he finally pulled up the team and turned to her. "I asked for a woman to cook for my outfit," he said. "You know that. You read the letters." "I kept them," Martha said. "I told you. I wrote 'em ashamed. A man too proud to court and too lonesome to keep on alone sending off for a stranger like she was a sack of seed. Cole had the right of it that first day, even if I'd have horsewhipped him for saying it." Wyatt looked at his hands on the reins. "And you stepped off that coach and I took one look and thought the Lord was punishing me. I'll carry the shame of that thought the rest of my days." "Wyatt, let me finish. I've been working up to it 3 weeks." He turned to face her full on. "I asked for a cook. What rode in on that stage was a woman who took a dead kitchen and made it the heart of this whole place. Who turned my men into something better than they were. Who looked the richest man in the county dead in the eye and unmade him with a pencil and a column of figures for nothing but that she'd found a place worth saving and meant to save it." His voice went rough and low. "I thought I needed a cook, Martha. Turns out I needed you. I think I've needed you a good while longer than I've known you, if that makes any sense at all, which it don't." Martha's hands had gone still on the ledgers in her lap, and her eyes were wet, and for the second time in her life, she found she couldn't make a single word come. "I'm not asking you to cook for me," Wyatt said. "I'm asking you to marry me. Proper. Not by letter. Not for wages. Because there isn't a thing on this earth I want more than to grow old at a table with you across it." He took off his hat the way he had the night of the storm, the way every man on that ranch had learned to do for her. "Will you have me Martha Bennett, knowing exactly the fool I was the day you came?" Martha looked at the man and the ranch behind him, and the kitchen window where she'd brought a dead woman's stove roaring back to life, and she thought of every cruel word that had ever been said over her, and how not one of them had ever managed to be true. "Wyatt Callahan," she said, "I have been told my whole life I wasn't worth keeping, by better-looking men than you, and worse ones too. And I stopped believing a single one of them a long time ago, which is the only reason I'm still standing here to be asked." She reached out and took his rough hand in her strong one. "Yes, I'll have you. And I'll keep your books while I'm at it so no slick devil ever cheats this family blind again." He laughed, and the sound of it filled up the wide, cold afternoon, and he pulled her in, and he kissed the bride nobody had wanted, like she was the only thing he'd ever wanted in his life. They married before the first snow. By the time winter came down hard off the Llano Red Creek Ranch was the talk of the county, not for its trouble anymore, but for its turnaround. The restitution herd fattened the stock back to full. The men stayed and worked harder than they ever had for a man whose wife knew their names and their favorite suppers and the ache in their backs before they spoke of it. Cole bossed the younger hands now and was good at it. Boone never raised his voice to a soul again. Amos took the room off the kitchen and never rode another hard mile in his life, and the two of them, the old trail rider and the cook who'd once fed him back from the dead, would sit by her stove of an evening and say nothing much at all, which is the kind of friendship that doesn't need words. And the kitchen. Eleanor's kitchen that had sat cold and shut for 4 grieving years never once went cold again. It became the heart of the place exactly as Martha had promised the night a sad boy tried to wreck a flour barrel and got handed a slice of bread instead. The door stood open. The coffee stayed hot. And no hungry stranger who ever wandered up that road, no matter how poor or how plain or how unwanted by the rest of the world, was ever again turned away from it. One snowy evening, standing at that warm stove with Wyatt's arms around her and the smell of supper filling the house, Martha Bennett finally let herself feel what she had earned, not because she'd changed a single thing about herself, not because she'd shrunk or softened or beg to be wanted, but because she had walked into a place that judged her on sight and refused to leave until it learned the truth. And the truth was this, and it does not bend for beauty or for gossip, or for any rich man's smile. A person's worth is never in how they look to the world that first laughs at them, but in what they build, what they mend, and who they refuse to let go. Hungry in that kind of worth, once it is finally seen, outlasts every cruel word ever spoken against it.